Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Hi, Crispin. Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Look, I just wanted to talk to you about the midterm elections. That was the plan originally, but I've been kind of sidetracked by this Bernie Sanders episode that's happened with you. I'll just introduce you so everyone knows who you are. You're the national chair of the People's Party in America, also the founder of the People's Party, and a former national political outreach coordinator for the Bernie 2016 campaign. Um, Now that the midterm elections haven't we haven't got a result for all of that yet. We don't really know where we stand. But what's your assessment of what they show?
Well, right now it seems likely that the Republicans are going to take the House of Representatives, breaking up the trifecta control, the overall control over the White House and Congress that the Democrats have had for the last 2 years and done nothing with, I might add, and we can talk about that. And then that the Democrats they seem more likely to hold on to the Senate at this point. There's a number of ramifications to that. On top of denying the Democrats their full majority, which frankly, my feeling is that the Democrats like it when they don't have entire majorities. It's really awkward when they control all branches of government and could do anything, because then people see through them for not following through on their campaign promises, whether it's to get a single payer Medicare for all system or a public option, as Biden promised here, with our horrific health system in the United States, completely privatized, employer-based, or whether it's to move up to a $15 minimum wage, because we have a $7.25 minimum wage here in the United States. Wow. Absolutely deplorable. You can't afford a place to live, a single bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment in any state in the country on that. So that's going to change, is that the Democrats won't have full control anymore. And the other thing, and frankly, something I'm looking forward to, is with the Republicans having the House, they're going to be investigating the Democrats for a number of different things, like Hunter Biden, the origins of COVID. Kevin McCarthy, the likely incoming House Speaker on the Republican side, said that he's going to investigate the Democrats for a number of these things that they frankly deserve to be investigated for. So, both parties in the United States, of course, are parties of war, anti-worker, totally controlled by Wall Street, get all their money from big pharma and big corporations, and neither one represents the people in this country. But thanks to our horrific electoral system, something we share with, I know, the UK, we have a largely two-party system, but we believe as the People's Party we can break through that. But that's some of what comes immediately to mind as what I think is going to happen.
What was the turnout like? I mean, do people come out to vote for the one of the two parties? I mean, is the choice so bad that people don't bother?
Turnout in the U.S. is much lower than in other wealthy countries, as I'm sure you know. Turnout in the midterms is even lower, than the presidential elections every 4 years, because I think you're exactly right. It's because both parties are the same. It doesn't matter which party's in charge. For the last few decades, especially since the 70s, and then even more so during Bill Clinton in the 90s, when the Democrats essentially became just another version of the Republicans, just a rebranded version of the Republicans. There's been total consensus in Washington, D.C., and between both political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, in decreasing wages, destroying whatever remains of unions and the labor movement here in this country, mass privatization, attempting bipartisan support for privatizing Social Security and Medicare, the bare, pathetic remains of a social safety net in this country to protect for people, exploding cost of education and student debt, past, I believe, $1.5 trillion. Biden promised he campaigned in 2020 on actually eliminating student debt. The federal government here in the US holds 92% of student debt. It could forgive it with one wave of Biden's magic executive action pen. Of course, that's a promise that he's now reneging on, basically like every other promise. And so both parties are parties that have prosecuted the endless war. They have created this incredibly destructive financial system, which periodically destroys everybody's investments and their savings, and kicks millions of people out of their homes, did so during the Great Recession, did so again during the COVID crash and that depression. And so these two parties, they stand for exactly the same thing. And meanwhile, you have now 3 billionaires that have as much wealth as the bottom half of the country, 3 people. You have Elon Musk, the world's richest man, who's on his way to becoming a trillionaire, the world's first trillionaire. And so this is a level of wealth inequality and disparity that is really reminiscent of feudal times. And one really wonders, why did we fight a war against a revolutionary war against the crown and the aristocracy against you in order to free ourselves, when we were just going to submit ourselves to a new corporate aristocracy here in this country?
Wow, that's very interesting and powerful what you're saying. Now, what I've seen a few interviews, a couple of interviews with you, and you talk about how important it is that people are emancipated in a society. And one particular thing that jumped out at me was you said the deadening of the soul. If people do not have that emancipation, then they have nothing almost to live for. And I'd just like to play you a short video of something to see what you think about this now, relating to the spirit that people are in.
Times are tough right now, and we don't have extra money to send to politicians.
Calling from the Bernie Sanders campaign.
So I saved me $20, gave myself my own haircut.
Feel the burn! Feel the burn!
I'm going to take that $20 and I'm going to send it to Bernie Sanders. And honey, I hope you're okay with that.
Brothers and sisters, now is not the time for thinking small. We are going to take this campaign directly to the people in town meetings, door-to-door conversations, on street corners, and in social media.
Remember that We the People part? Sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Feel the burn.
We need a political revolution where millions of people become deeply engaged in the political process and the fight for the future of our nation. So if anyone tells you we didn't change the world overnight, I'm giving up. Think about those people who struggled decade after decade, gave their lives. What we accept as normal, I want your grandchildren to tell you you were crazy to accept it.
There is something more powerful than fear and hatred and violence. It is love.
A military mindset doesn't mean that you go around with your chest stuck out, trying to look tough.
Make sure that wherever you go, you take the name, the ideas, the philosophy, and the ideology of Bernie Sanders there, and you make sure when you leave, they are on fire because they have felt the burn.
You go out and you talk to young people in this country and you say something like, do you believe in gay marriage? And they say, duh. That's when you have a revolution. Thank you all. The struggle continues.
Right, now, I wanted to play that because I wanted you to kind of remember or rekindle the spirit that you had during that 2016 campaign for Bernie Sanders. But we had that in the same kind of level here with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership campaign. Loads of hope was what you see in that clip. people really believing that politics could change things. Can you tell us what your role was in there, in that campaign, and what your memories are of the spirit that you felt around 2016?
Well, I want to say first that it's incredibly sad to see that right now, to see it again. And to see the difference, the chasm between the person who is reflected in that campaign ad, which I remember when it aired, to the person today who is Bernie Sanders, who's turned his back on so many things that he fought for on that campaign. In the 2016 campaign, before the 2016 campaign, I'd worked on a number of Democratic campaigns with Terry McAuliffe, and who went on to become Virginia governor, was a big fundraiser for the Clintons. John Kerry, who's, of course, Secretary of State, head of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. And that turned me off to the Democratic Party, and it led me to Bernie because I thought that he was different. I had just, I had quit the Democratic Party before joining with Bernie. But when Bernie came around, I went to his first rally. It was at International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Union, modest gathering of people there, just when he was just getting started. And I listened to him and I said, I can't just stand on the sidelines, I need to be a part of this. This is something that could, make an impact. And this man sounds genuine. He sounds honest. So I joined the campaign in the fall of 2015, and I ended up doing outreach to the Democratic Party superdelegates, which are basically the party bosses that control the primary process in the Democratic Party for the presidential nomination. And that experience was the last nail in the coffin with the Democratic Party for me, because I saw how corrupted and controlled they were. I was essentially trying to persuade corporate lobbyists and consultants who sit on the DNC and profit, from the political system in the U.S., which is just completely unregulated as far as the money that you can accept. And so
can I just come in and ask you? There's something about a primary rigging of primaries in 2016. So that's like electoral fraud, effectively, isn't it? And this is something that held back Bernie Sanders from winning. Can you tell us any more on that? I mean, I don't need to get in legal trouble if there's anything you might say.
No. Not at all. I've talked about it many times, and there's been court cases to this effect. The Democratic Party rigged the 2016 presidential election. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. It's a fact that's been established in court. It's a fact that has been established from WikiLeaks revelations in 2016 at the convention in July of 2016. There were people who were fired from the DNC over it. The DNC chair herself, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, stepped down as a result. And it's even been admitted by others, including Donna Brazile, who was a former DNC chair, and Tom Perez. They rigged the primary process against Bernie Sanders and for Hillary Clinton, who was the less electable candidate, and then went on to lose to Donald Trump. Now, where I put the primary responsibility, though, is Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders did not confront the rigging. He didn't even admit that it had happened. He allowed it to happen to him. He didn't challenge it at the time. And even now, 6 years later, he has still never admitted the rigging, even while you've had leaders in the DNC admit it And that has prevented any kind of change, meaningful change, or any kind of meaningful reckoning in the Democratic Party over what was done.
So yeah, I can't believe what you're saying, that but Bernie Sanders was cheated. These people have admitted they cheated, so the evidence would have been there if he'd pushed for it. Yet he hasn't done anything to complain or make any get any justice for it. What I have to ask you, why? Why do you think he hasn't done anything?
No, he bought into the Russiagate narrative that came afterwards, which was designed as an attack on him. I think that he hasn't done it because Bernie Sanders, unfortunately, is not a revolutionary. He's not here to change the system fundamentally. That man in the campaign ad that you shared, he doesn't exist. He exists as much as Obama in his campaign ads. It's the same thing. That's the sad conclusion that I came to after working with Bernie. And it extended beyond that too. Actually, the reason that I stopped working with Bernie, because I worked with him even after the campaign, was that he picked me and 13 others out of 2,000 staff members from the campaign to help him form Our Revolution, which was going to be the organization that was going to carry on the political revolution of that electric and magical 2016 campaign. What happened just a month into being in that organization in August of 2016 at Our Revolution, Bernie Sanders tried to take money from billionaires, the very same billionaires that he had railed against Hillary Clinton for taking money from, the very same billionaires that he mentioned in the slogan beneath every single piece of merchandise and email that he sent to his millions of supporters, paid for by Bernie Sanders, not the billionaires. And he kept that tagline while he was reaching out to billionaires, and he set up the legal entity for Our Revolution as a 501c4, despite advice from lawyers, despite advice from all of his staff members who were joining us. He set it up as a C4 rather than a PAC. Why? Because a C4 allowed him to reach out to these big donors secretly without telling his base, whom he was continuing to give the impression that he wasn't taking big money. So on the one hand, he was reaching out to the small grassroots dollar donors who had believed in him. And on the other hand, he was reaching out to these big billionaire donors and trying to take money in Our Revolution. And that's when I stood up among the staff and I said, enough. I won't be a part of this. I can't be a part of this. And almost the entire staff joined me. And we tried to persuade Bernie not to take that big money, that he had built something revolutionary by opposing that big money and that influence that it represents and the corruption it represents in both parties and in Hillary Clinton, but he refused. He refused. His wife, Jane Sanders, and his longtime 30-year friend who'd worked with him in the House and the Senate, Jeff Weaver, were in favor of it, and they kept him on that. And so we walked away. And it was seeing what the Democratic Party had been able to do to Bernie Sanders, of all people, that finally convinced me that that party can never be saved.
It's hard to think of what to say after that. Because in this country, we've been sold that Bernie Sanders is the only radical voice in the US, similar to Jeremy Corbyn. But Jeremy Corbyn has kept his ideals pretty much the whole way through, attack after attack. He's never taken money from big billionaires or millionaires. Even I can't imagine how demoralizing it must be to have spent that time believing in someone and then to find out that they were not the person you thought about they were. Now, I just want to move on a bit because that's heartbreaking enough to have gone through all that. But then the war in Ukraine, in this country, we've had wall-to-wall propaganda in support of NATO's intervention and anti-war, anti-Russia propaganda, pro-Ukraine propaganda. I mean, I don't even watch the media here anymore because it's too. I just can't believe any of it. But we do have an anti-war movement. We've got Stop the War. We had a demonstration here before the Iraq War with 3 million people, the largest demonstration we've had in this country against the Iraq War. Stop the War have been calling out what's going on in Ukraine. And the Labour Party MPs of the left signed a letter to say that we should call for negotiations. The leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, said that if they didn't withdraw their names from that letter, they would lose the whip, i.e. they'd lose their party status.
Wow.
And all of them took their names off the letter, except Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn's the only MP who kept his name on the letter. Now, in the US, a similar kind of letter was written by the radical or progressive, as they might call themselves, Democrats. And I believe the same kind of thing happened there. Is this anti-war issue exposing the non-credentials of the left in a way that you might not have imagined anything else has done before?
I believe that it is, and I'll say that's an incredible story. I did not know that the same thing had essentially played out in the UK, and I suppose you you should be grateful that you have at least one person in your left party who's willing to stand up, because in the Democratic Party, not Bernie Sanders, we can talk about this, I'm sure, but Bernie Sanders personally smeared me as a potential Russian agent.
Well, I'm going to show that. I'm going to show that as well. But yeah, you know, tell us about the squad and the other non-Bernie. Let's leave Bernie Sanders to a bit later.
the squad members. And so they very much come out of the Bernie Sanders revolution, for anyone who doesn't know their history. After Bernie ran in 2016, there was our revolution, and there were other organizations that sought to elect progressives and replace some of the establishment Democrats, the corporate money Democrats, with these new generation of progressives. And so it began in 2018, the first midterms after 2016, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, was elected, and she came in with a few others, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley. And then they've been joined in 2020 and now in 2022 by a few others. I believe there's about 9 of them now. But as you mentioned, none of them opposed the war. They are, when it comes to the war and when it comes to war funding, they are just like the establishment Democrats. Here in the United States, we've sent about $80 billion of military and aid to Ukraine to wage that war, which of course the United States is responsible for provoking through NATO expansion and its coup in 2014 of the democratically elected Ukrainian government. And all the progressives, after being protested, I'll say, this viral protest where a couple of protesters stood up with the Schiller Institute, they stood up and they called out AOC at a town hall, and it went viral. It got 8 million views. They called her out for funding the war, and they said, "You're a progressive. You're supposed to be against the war. We sent you there to be different from the establishment, but you're doing everything to just validate the establishment. You're going along with them in this war, and this war could go nuclear. It's incredibly dangerous." They called her out for that. That, I believe, had the effect of pressing some of these progressive members of Congress. There were 30 of them who signed the letter to Joe Biden. Now, the letter called for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, negotiations that the United States would take part in with Russia and Putin and Zelensky to end that war. And the letter did not call for an end to the weapons or the aid going to Ukraine from the United States. It did not call for a ceasefire. It said, hey, at the same time that we're pouring tens of billions of dollars into this war and now sending our own troops that are crossing the border into Ukraine, 101st Airborne Division was deployed by Biden to Romania and is crossing into Ukraine now. Okay, well, while we're doing that, can we please also give ourselves an off-ramp by negotiating and pursuing diplomacy and peace? And that was too much for the rest of the Democratic Party and Biden and Nancy Pelosi and the leadership, because they descended on those progressives, and the retribution was so swift and so harsh that within 24 hours, every single signatory, they had all withdrawn their support they had withdrawn the letter. There was, I believe there was one person that I know of, Ro Khanna, who said, well, I still believe in negotiations, but absolutely pathetic, total capitulation within the Democratic Party of the progressives when it comes to this war. And, the last thing I want to add to that is just that this money that is being sent in the context of a country, the richest country in the history of the world, where 1 in 5 children, I believe it's 2 in 5 children, live in poverty. There's mass poverty. The minimum wage hasn't been raised in almost a couple decades, where you have this just incredible destructive inequality, where people cannot afford healthcare because it's completely privatized, where there's 500,000 people who are homeless, and even more that's exploding. You have incredible debt. People can't afford rent. All of that's being done. So they're at the same time that our government isn't helping any of those people, and those problems are exploding. Small businesses absolutely destroyed, a small business apocalypse through the administration's COVID policies, Biden and Trump together, the way it decimated. And so at the same time that that's happening, multiple packages of billions of dollars are being periodically shoveled by both parties almost unanimously in Congress, just a handful of Republicans opposing it, Republicans, not Democrats. And each one is a stab in the back to the working class that can't afford housing, healthcare, or debt, education, any kind of basic necessities that should be guaranteed in the 21st century in the richest country in the world.
Very powerful again. The austerity that we're facing in this country is the same. We're being asked to provide aid to military aid to Ukraine, and we're supposed to be fighting. But people will die this winter because of the heating, the cost of fuel, and we're supposed to do that for Ukraine. We're being told that it's a kind of duty of ours to die for Ukraine. That's how similar it is. Again, now I'm going to play you a clip because I'd like to hear your reaction. But this is a your meeting with Bernie Sanders again, having worked for him not long ago.
We are taking on unlimited amounts of money. But Bernie, the money. Where is our money going? You're sending money to Nazis in Ukraine. We're not going to let people control our meeting. So we're
Why did you oppose the letter? Where we are taking money is in this moment. You're starting a nuclear war with the billionaire class, the billionaire class. You were supposed to start a political revolution. Instead, you're sending money. You're telling the people of Pennsylvania, a third world war, Bernie. Why are you voting to fund a nuclear war, Bernie? Why are you voting to fund a nuclear war, Bernie? You answer our question. Why? Who's paying you? No one. Who is paying you? No one. No one. The people are paying me, Bernie. Why does someone have to be paid by Russia or someone else to oppose the war, Bernie? Why does someone have to be that? Bernie, why are you paying for it? Why are you funding Nazis in Ukraine, Bernie? Why?
Wow. And he just goes up and who's paying you? Who's paying you? And you could say, who's paying you, Bernie?
Yes. Yes. We paid you in $27 increments. When we paid you $240 million in 2016, when you ran against war to end the United States' endless wars. In 2020, another $200 million from working people that you just showed in that ad. They skipped haircuts. They skipped meals to give him that money. I know people who skipped funerals of loved ones because it was the days before the vote and they were out there campaigning. That's how much people believed in him. And he ran against ending those wars. And there he is, comes up to me, accuses me, someone he knows who worked for him 6 years ago on ending those wars, of being a paid agent, McCarthyite, smearing me. Because while I'm questioning him on his support for the war, it was surreal.
Wow. How did you feel after that? Were you distraught?
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I didn't think that I could be more disappointed in that man with everything that he has done and every illusion that he has shattered about who he pretended to be. But he proved otherwise. He proved otherwise. For Bernie to join the corporate media and the Wall Street controlled Democrat Party and people in the Republican Party, and to resort to the refrain of those establishment forces, of those intelligence aligned forces, even to use the same smear that you hear from them, that if you're opposing the war, you must somehow be a Russian agent, or you must be paid off in order to do that. It's unbelievable. It's incredibly reprehensible. And like you said, it speaks to the fact that there is no opposition to war represented. There's no opposition within the two parties. In the Democrat Party, which is supposed to be the left party, there's fewer people opposing it, nobody, than there is in the Republican Party even. The Democrat Party has put itself to the right of the Republican Party. During the Trump administration, the Democrat Party, the Republican Party was, of course, the war budget increases. It consumes more than half the discretionary budget in the United States, the federal discretionary budget, the Pentagon, and the war budget. But the Democrats were sending him more money than he asked for, more money for the Pentagon. It's $800 billion, but that's not enough, more money. And so it's incredible. And I think, like you started off, like you led, it goes to show that when it comes to preserving the empire and American hegemony, there is a complete discipline that is required in the corporate parties, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, of which there is no room. And of course, in the United States, the fact that we're the global hegemon took that role from you all after the Second World War. The fact that we have that position is why me and others in the People's Party and others in the anti-war movement believe that it is so important to regiment and control the American political system in order to prevent any kind of dissension politically, and so that you prevent anyone who might challenge that from arising. it's important for global capital, especially global finance capital, to prevent anyone in the US political system, especially a political party, to arise that is opposed to its position as global hegemon, because their profits, their international institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, their entire global control system is built and anchored in the United States. And so it's the same reason that in the United States, while Europe in the post-war era after the Second World War, there were still socialist parties, there were still communist parties throughout Europe. That was extinguished in the United States during the Red Scare, during the McCarthyite era in the 50s. It was absolutely snuffed out. Any kind of left was decimated. The labor movement went from, right after the post-war period, it went from 35% unionization, workforce unionization, down to now 10%, crushed. And it's because of that position that the United States inhabits, that unique position of being the global hegemon, where it's important not just for the oligarchs in this country, but for global financial oligarchs around the world and for global capitalism to make sure that this country remains completely in the grips of global capitalism and that is never challenged. And so that's why you have the kind of poverty, you have the kind of deplorable healthcare system, the deplorable wages, the homelessness. All of those problems are linked to the United States' status as global hegemon and empire. And so that's why it's so important to challenge that. And that's also why it's so important that there be perfect discipline in warmongering in the two parties.
Right. Oh. So you've really had an awakening from all these incidents. I mean, 2016, all that hope, and then this kind of McCarthyite smear of you by Sanders. I'm just wondering. I mean, we'd all be wondering over in this country what's happened to the Sanders supporters, the loads of thousands of people that were going out to rallies. Do they feel let down and despondent as well? Are they politically homeless? Are you trying to find a home for them?
That is a phenomenon that I believe is gripping the United States right now, is that there is a complete collapse in confidence in institutions in the United States and also membership in organizations. Collapse in, when you look at trust, over the last 50 years, 80% of people used to trust in the United States in early 1970. They trusted the government to do the right thing 80% of the time. 80% of people said that. Now it's down to 20%. 20% trust the government to do the right thing, generally. And so you've had the same thing, a complete collapse in trust in the presidency, Congress, the Supreme Court, our policing system, the courts in general, television news, print media, big corporations, banks. It's just across the board a loss of confidence in institutions. And at the same time, you've had this, and I believe it all ties back into, again, our status as hegemon and global empire. You've had this atomization of society, where you have institutions that can provide any kind of community in states and towns, whether it's churches, whether it's local clubs, whether it is political organizations. You have seen their membership decimated, and I believe it's deliberate. And it was accelerated by COVID. It was accelerated by COVID and the lockdowns when everybody was isolated, because it is to the empire's advantage that we all be isolated from one another and that we all be separated, so that we can never communicate, so that we can never build bonds that could ever perhaps grow into a collective understanding that we're all being screwed by this system and that we should challenge it and that we should take it on. I think it is a staple of tyrannical systems and governments to want to isolate and atomize their populations and prevent communication between them. And that's what we have in the United States. The United States is in a pre-revolutionary state right now. It is in a state where all of the preconditions for a revolution in a country exist. And when you study the history of revolutions, you never know what's going to set them off. My family came from Chile and migrated to the United States. It's a country where the CIA overthrew a democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende, installed a military general, Augusto Pinochet, killed and disappeared 30,000 people for the next 17 years until it was abolished by the Chilean people. That is the kind of pre-revolutionary state that we are here in the United States, where we're waiting. And what I was going to say was that there was an uprising in Chile in 2019, which I'm sure you know all about. Students, it was caused by triggered by a slight increase in the subway fare in Santiago, Chile's capital, and students, as a sign of protest to that, because Chile is a country that's even more unequal, has even greater poverty than the United States. Students began jumping the turnstile to get into the metro, get into the tube, and that act of defiance built confidence within Santiago and within the people, and it mounted to protests involving more than 1 million people out in the streets of Santiago. Which led to, of course, the calls for a new constitution and the process for a new constitution. And along that path, I think that path has taken a sad turn. Unfortunately, the new constitution wasn't approved, even though it would have been a fantastic constitution. I think it fell victim to wokeness to an extent, which also grips the Democratic Party here in the United States, identity politics. But it is that sort of pre-revolutionary state that the United States is in. It's just waiting for a trigger, and you don't know what's going to set it off. It can be something small like that. It usually is something small and symbolic like that. But that's where we are. Wow.
So actually, the sort of veneer of democracy and sort of, yeah, the veneer of democracy has been taken away. That people are not believing that they're in a democratic country, and you don't know where it's going. But you've bravely, courageously decided to put your neck out and start a new party, which must have taken some doing. Can you tell us how you managed to create that idea and act on it?
Yeah, certainly. It's been a challenge here in the United States. We have first past the post, electoral system. I know you have it as well, and it makes it incredibly difficult. We also don't, we have single member winner elections, and so as a result of not having ranked choice voting, multi-member districts, any of that, the political system funnels into these two corporate controlled parties. And so it's very difficult. On top of that, we have something which I think is probably exceeds the level of electoral controls that exist in the UK, and that is our ballot access laws. Our ballot access over here is I would call it a human rights violation, because they have made it so unbelievably difficult to register a new party and to get ballot access in the United States. And you need ballot access in order to be able to field a candidate. That's
so yeah, I thought you meant access to vote. You mean to actually be a party, you have to get permission?
I mean that to create a new party and to be able to field candidates on the ballot, under that party, you have to, in every single state, and all 50 states have a different process, but generally the process is you have to collect tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of signatures in order to be able to have a ballot line, to be able to run candidates as a party in a separate party. Sometimes the rules are even worse. In some states, you have to collect those signatures within a time frame of a few weeks, and you have to collect a certain number from every district. It's just and then of course, when you turn, even if you manage to jump all of their hurdles, the secretaries of state, which control the elections process in the states and the Board of Elections, they're controlled by the two parties. Those are elected positions held by either Democrats or Republicans, both of which work as hard as they possibly can to suppress third parties in the United States.
Wow.
And so then immediately, if you cross all those hurdles, turn in all these thousands of signatures, the secretaries of state and the political parties get to work disqualifying them. They just start throwing them out, and you have almost no recourse to this. And so they'll try to get you below the threshold that you're supposed to turn in a particular district or in the state as a whole. So it's a catastrophe. Trying to start a third party in the United States, they've made it so unbelievably difficult. But, we've achieved ballot access in Florida. We're working on other states, and we want to run a presidential candidate in 2024.
Wow. So you really, it's a real hurdle to even get on the paper. It's unbelievable. But you're not seeing that as obviously a win. You're not saying that you can win the presidency, but you're using that as a way of spreading a message and engaging more people. Is that how you're seeing the whole process?
It's both. It's both. Here in the United States, support for a third party has exploded over the last couple decades. So does the number of independents. Millions of people are leaving both parties. So about half the country identifies as an independent now. Only a quarter identifies as a Democrat. Another quarter is a Republican. And then support for a third party has gone from about 40% to 71% in the last couple of decades. So there's humongous support for this. And we think that with the right person, and especially if we can force some of these candidates into debates with us or into confrontations with us, into exchanges with the right person, we could possibly win, because this country is so fed up with both political parties, and that includes Biden and Trump. 60% of people don't want Biden or Trump. They want someone else. But like you're getting at, I completely agree with that. We do. There's multiple ways to win, and there's multiple things that we would consider winning. Presidential campaigns, in the United States, they're such extravagant, big affairs. They get, they get so much attention that it is a way to organize more people against the two parties, against the oligarchy in this country. It's a way to hold direct actions, perhaps help organize a general strike in this country, which there's a lot of people working on. Also, direct actions confronting the war, for example, rallies, protests, occupations. Also a vehicle to bring some of these new labor unions that are rising in the United States. There's a spark of resurgence in the labor movement, with Amazon being unionized for the first time in the U.S., Starbucks being unionized.
We've got that here. We've got Amazon.
Good.
And Starbucks we're working on. We've got lots of people trying to energize the union movement. But I mean, that it's a long, hard graft to get this to change. There's no sort of social media post that's suddenly going to get you a revolution. Some people on the left, maybe more than the right, tend to think that it's got to be easy. There's got to be a quick fix to this. It is a long process, isn't it? But we're against such big business and corporations, and you can't think that it would be easy. I mean, it's got to be a lot of work, but it would be really good to keep in touch across the pond, as I say, because I think the same thing's happening here. We're all coming to see that the Labour Party, which was seen as the radical socialist vehicle, is no longer there. It doesn't work. It doesn't. It's been bought. It's been bought by the same kind of interests you're talking about. The lobbyists have taken over, and we have a two-party system, and we have first past the post, and we have NATO, and we're your poodle. But we're in a very similar situation, and there's lots of people here who are homeless politically, just like you're sort of describing. And I think that the next 10 years will be really important to build really good organizations across every country, really. And with Zoom and things like that, we can talk quite easily. So look, I know you're a busy guy, and I'm really, really pleased to speak to you. And I feel the same pain as you have felt since 2015. The whole journey is soul destroying, but can
I say one more thing?
They want to. But can I just say something? What you said about the spirit is so important. Your spirit has to be good, otherwise you won't get out of bed. They want to isolate us. They want us to stay in bed and do nothing. But if we have some spirit, we can win in the end, I think.
It gives me hope to connect with people like you, Crispin, who are working on the same thing, an alternative party. And I'll just say to anyone who's listening, one of the things that gives me hope is the fact that the post World War II party system in Europe and in Latin America, and I think soon in the United States, was very much. It was relatively static. In many powerful countries across Europe, for example, including the UK, it was the same two political parties that generally dominated. Even in the multi-party systems, but that's changing. You look at France. You look at they've done away with their parties. You look at Italy, they've done away with their parties. You look at Spain, they had kind of a resurgence. The kind of old guard parties have kind of, taken back control. But there are things changing. You look at the Greens in Germany, now they've taken a horrific turn, but still it gives me hope in what I remember hearing Julian Assange express once. And this was shortly after we started, actually, where he said that the internet has given the ability for people to connect like we are and to organize much more fluidly. And when you combine that, but not just that, it's given you the ability to crowdfund, donation. That's how Bernie on his campaign, that's how he raised so much money. It was all through small dollar donations online. It's given us the ability to reach more people to organize. It's given us the ability to circumvent the elite corporate media because now we have podcasts and shows like yours, and we've got our own in the United States, and so we can get around the gatekeepers of information. So, like Julian said, the internet is enabling a much more fluid and much more elastic party ecosystem and environment. Around the world. And that gives me a lot of hope because it tells me that we can, in fact, make change. And it is going to be hard. It is going to be slog. It's going to take time. But also, when you're combining those newfound technological abilities and, that we have that empower the working class, which the working class has never before had in all of, history, with neoliberal austerity and warmongering and, the push towards nuclear apocalypse, you combine it with those, then you can get really fast changes in the political system. I know that the Brexit party, when it won the EU election, I mean, it was just a few weeks that its support exploded, right? And so, that kind of thing can happen. It can happen for the populist left too, and that gives me hope.
Great. Well, look, thank you so much for this, and I hope to catch up with you again, especially when you get your presidential campaign underway. It'd be good to be able to get people to support you in that. Thank you so much, Nick.
Well, same with you, Crispin. Thanks so much. Happy to come on anytime, and happy to talk anytime. Let's keep in touch.